to sit down for a chat today with the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital, Sir Martin Sorrell. Launched in 2018, the digital advertising and marketing services company has experienced rapid growth since its birth. Already in the first 2 weeks of the new year, S4 Capital has announced 3 new acquisitions, which sees its ranks expand to around 4,000 people based in 31 countries. We're fortunate to sit with Sir Martin at the start of the new year and learn a little bit more about what's to come as we kick off 2021. Sir Martin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Bobby. They're not acquisitions, they're mergers. It's an important distinction. It sounds a bit semantic, but we're looking for people to join us on this mission of creating the new advertising and marketing services model and disrupting the old. So I just want to get that straight out of the traps, as they say. We're very much determined to create something new and disrupt the old.
Well, you know, that's actually, and pardon my little stumble on semantics there, but it does bring up an interesting point. The other day, after following the Tomorrow acquisition, on LinkedIn, the founder of Tomorrow had mentioned how over the past year, he had been approached by all of the major network agencies and had turned them all down. But with S4 Capital, he said specifically it felt right. So I'm curious, what do you think it is about the workplace culture, the model, the workplace model that makes people want to join?
Well, I think it's what I just said, really, that we're sort of men and women on a mission. If you look at, interesting, we have about 9 investment analysts that follow the company. Exane BNP do an interesting analysis of comparing us to the holding companies. I have to say, I don't think the comparison to the holding companies is right. It's sort of comparing apples with oranges. We're different, and that's part of the reason why you saw those comments on LinkedIn, that basically, firstly, we're on a mission, as I described it, to create a new model. Secondly, we're there to disrupt. And thirdly, we're basically founders and entrepreneurs who want to build a significant business in our industry. And being purely digital, being built around data, first-party data, and the signals around content, around digital media and data and analytics, being faster, better, and cheaper, going to market as faster, better, cheaper, and last but not least, having a unitary structure, one P&L without conflicting silos and conflicting, fragmenting earnouts, because we don't do earnouts as well. We found at WPP that created fragmentation, and you see it still at WPP. It's a company that is sort of divided and split and pitted against one another rather than one firm. They claim they've simplified it, but I think that's just simply not true. They probably made it more complicated by really enforcing the silos and building them into bigger ones. So I think for all those reasons, we're different. And I think that's why companies such as Tomorrow, there's an empathy there, there's a common mission there, there's a common understanding that makes us very different. And we have to make sure as we grow, and we're growing quite violently, we're growing quite strongly, both organically. Analysts are looking for us to have grown in a COVID year last year, like for like, by 15 to 20%, and we'll be at the north end of that. So we're growing violently organically, and we're growing violently, if I can put it right like that, by merger. By consolidation. And I think that entrepreneurs and people who really are interested in really taking risk in the company. I mean, people who run the holding companies really have nothing at stake. They have their position at stake. They have their jobs at stake. That's why they fire the soldiers, and the generals just sit there, sending emails to one another. Used to be paper, but it's now emails to one another with increasing magnitude, it seems, if you look at the numbers. So I think it's a very different approach. It's a very much more modern totally digital, and we took a risk really because we said we wanted to focus on digital, which meant that the clients would have to either coordinate traditional and digital themselves, or they would leave it to us to do that. And we're, digital is now half of the market. It will be 70% of the market. The market's about 500 to 550 billion last year. This year probably will be about 550 to 600 billion, but traditional media will continue. There'll be a bounce back, but traditional media will continue to grow far more slowly than digital. Digital this year will grow by about probably 20% globally. So digital now, last year, if the advertising media market was about 500 to 550 billion, digital media was about 250 to 275. This year it will grow, as I said, by about 20%. So it's a more risky environment. The other thing is, I think when you sell to a network, you sell. When you merge with us, you take quite respectively about half of your investment or the value of your investment off the table in cash, and the other half you roll into S4 Capital stock. And we've done well, obviously, from 2 years ago, from zero basically. We're now about £3 billion, about $4 billion. So we've grown quite substantially, and we think that will continue to be the case. And so entrepreneurs like the system where you take half, you bank half in cash, and the other half you let run in the growth of the company. And with the unitary P&L, we very much unify the way that we look at things and the way we do things.
Well, you described the growth as violent, so I don't feel so bad about using the word acquisition. So, getting back to, you announced 3 mergers right off the bat for 2021. Is this indicative of what we can look forward to being an aggressive acquisition strategy, merger strategy for 2021?
Yeah, it's been we've done a lot since we started. I mean, we had 2 core, started with nothing, and with a vision about building this new age, new era advertising and marketing services model and disrupting the old. And we started our core deals around Media Monks in content and Mighty Hive in data and digital media. And then we've added 8 companies over the last couple of years to Media Monks and 7 to Mighty Hive. Well, actually, it's more than that now. It's more. It's 9 and 7, and 9 around content and 7 around data and digital media. And we created these 2 practices, which we'll launch in 2021. I mean, looking at 2021, we have 3 objectives. The first is not around expansion by merger. The first is to bed down these very significant client wins that we've had, BMW Mini in Europe and Mondelez globally, including Europe. And the task is to bed those down, because those are what we call whoppers. So we have 5 clients with revenues of more than $20 million. The first is Google, considerably more than 20 million. The second is it's a well-known telecommunications company, which we're NDA'd on, which I won't talk about publicly. But guess you already mentioned it in this session. The third and fourth will be a BMW Mini and Mondelez. We'll see how that pans out in order. And the 5th is Facebook. And of course, we have a number of very large digital clients: Uber, Amazon, SoFi, ServiceNow, HP, Robinhood. They all tot up to about 55% of our revenues. And that's why the comparison to the holding companies is not the right comparison, because we're tech-led, tech-born, digital native, really. I mean, it's not even digital first. I mean, it's totally inbred. We're tech people rather than agency people. So it's a very
makes you more attractive to tech companies as well.
Yeah. So the first objective next year, or this year, sorry, is to focus on organic growth. The second, and bed down, as I said, those big wins, because those big wins, I think, are emblematic to clients, all right? They're iconic for clients. Expansion. In Germany, for example, we won a bank called N26 on the back of BMW Mini. We're in a big global pitch at the moment off the back of that, arising from Germany. So we made a number of inroads. So that's number one. Number two is to cement our unitary branding. I mean, we've always been unitary, one P&L, seamless, not the BS that you hear from the holding companies. This is real stuff, where we work together seamlessly, and the branding is going to follow that. So you'll see that very shortly. And the third is the inorganic or growth by deals or mergers, which, we started off strongly in 2021. And I wanted to do that because that's a signal around Brexit. I think, that if I can be sort of grand about it, there's a sort of a new mercantilism that is necessary around Brexit for the British. Otherwise, we'll be increasingly marginalised. We'll have the devolution question around Scotland, Scottish independence, driven in part by what's happened over Europe, because the Scots wanted to stay quite clearly in Europe. So the UK is going to be under pressure economically, not just because of the impact of globalization and technology, but because of COVID-19, sadly, of course, and because of Brexit. So we've had this troika of things, this triple whammy that is hitting the country, and there might be a fourth, the continued problems around devolution, not just the Scots, but the Northern Irish as well. So we have to see what happens. But I think for the UK to prosper, I think if you think about the UK was on a growth track, as a result of Brexit, on top of coronavirus, we've fallen off that growth track, particularly Brexit. And it will take us 5 years to get back on that track and go beyond. I think, ultimately, I think we'll be resourceful enough to go beyond where we would have been if we had stayed, which in Europe, which I believe we should have done. But, the die is cast, the electorate have made their mind. We had our referendum and we're out. And now the uncertainty has been removed by the deal being done, which I think psychologically was good. I don't think materially it made much difference, but psychologically good. So now we're on our way. And I think what it needs is, an aggressive sort of Germanic approach, get off your backsides and export, whether it be goods and services, high value manufacturing, services, whatever it be. So, in a way, what I was trying to do, or what we were trying to do, is to signal that this is a new era. UK is less than 10% of our business, so it's not important commercially from us. North and South America are very important commercially. We're 70% North and South America, we're 20% Western Europe, we're 10% Asia Pacific, and we want to get to 40-20-40. That's what so countries like Vietnam, where you are, will become more and more important for us over the years. And tomorrow was important because it doubled our size in China. We now have about 500 people out of 4,000 in Asia Pacific, and Asia Pacific is going to become more and more important to us, particularly as India and China and Indonesia and Vietnam and other parts of the region become more and more important economically. So growth is primarily in 2021 focused around organic. Secondly, the objective is around the unitary branding. And then the third is not to diminish its importance, but the third is mergers. But Tony, you'll see more from us, as I've indicated in the announcement over Decoded Advertising and Metric Theory. I indicated we'd do more. Well, the first of those was tomorrow. We've got a couple of other things coming shortly, one in Western Europe and another one in Asia Pacific. So we're really very keen to expand as aggressively as possible. And partly that's because probably 2021 is going to be a rebound year. And we see this as a very big opportunity. And China, of course, is quite incredible that China has grown in 2020 by about 2%. The GDP forecast for last year were about 2%. And the world will probably grow about 5% this year. I mean, people are getting nervous about vaccine coverage and about the new mutant strains of the vaccine. But I think, by the second quarter, we will be largely moving out of this. But I try to run a business, and I think you have to be on the optimistic side. I don't think you can be a moaning Minnie about what's going on. You have to look at what's happening and try and be realistic about it with your people and clients, etc. But having said that, you have to have a view as to when things are going to improve. Companies generally, big companies, tend to be conservative in their forecasting because they don't want to get caught out by the market, by the street or by the city. They're naturally probably rightly conservative. I think we're being a little bit more realistic about the prospects.
Okay. And speaking of Asia, you have the Tomorrow merger. Last year, you had the Datalicious Korea merger, which I think is the best agency name I've ever heard in history, Datalicious. I don't know why they just didn't keep the name and name the whole organization Datalicious.
Well, they wanted to keep it. They wanted to keep it.
I don't blame them. You should put that on the auction block. So how important is Asia in the expansion strategy here in the next few years?
Well, as I said, it's 10% at the moment now, and we wanted to be 40. So the answer is very, very,
40.
Yeah. So very important is what we want. I said in the Tomorrow release that I've always been a raging bull on China. I can modify that to I've always been a raging bull on Asia Pacific, and we had dramatic success in both China and India and Vietnam and in Indonesia and ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and Japan. We tried. Japan, I must admit, was not easy. South Korea, we did well as well. I'm talking about WPP days here, and of course Australia and New Zealand. But having said that, I think times have changed. Particularly in India and China, the models. The existing model is an opaque model. There's a lot of mystery to it. There's a lot of behind the arras. There's a lot of opacity there that needs to be dealt with. And I think transparency is going to be the key. So our model is transparent. You can't say totally transparent. It's either transparent or it's not. Our model is transparent. For instance, I noticed what happened at T-Mobile in the US this week. It's sort of interesting that Publicis were pushed out, and the business was put into IPG. And I think IPG, over the past couple of years, particularly since the ANA transparency crisis, if I can put it like that, around 2016, has based their proposition more on transparency and an open book. And I think that sort of approach is going to become more and more important, particularly in the Chinese and Indian markets. The President Xi has, put his foot down on corruption, and there are still things that go on within the media markets that need to be dealt with, I think. And I think the government probably is in favor of dealing with that in the most constructive way. And I think the same thing applies in India, that there is a lack of transparency that needs to be dealt with, and I think clients would welcome that. So I think there's some opportunities for us. That's also on the digital media side. On the data and analytics side, there's huge opportunities in all markets, and in the content side, there's huge opportunities. So I think Asia Pacific for us is core. Scott Spirit, our growth officer, Michelle de Rijk, used to be Xaxis, joined us as CEO of Asia Pacific. Know what they have to do. They're both based in Singapore, and I think Tomorrow will be the first of many moves, I hope, in China, and I hope elsewhere in Asia Pacific too.
Oh, great. I was hoping to ask you a management question, especially, we're in this era of the work from home culture. I don't know if you saw today, the head of Unilever said that it's going to be old fashioned to work 5 days a week. You had, Jack Dorsey from Twitter last year saying that, employees wanted to avoid the office forever they could. Moving forward, what lessons have you learned that you think you'll carry forward post-pandemic, and how will it affect the work culture at S4 Capital?
Well, to some extent, we're different. We're different certainly to the holding companies, and we will be different to a Unilever, probably not dissimilar to a Twitter, by virtue of the nature of our people and our origins. So being a digital-only company, working from home, remote working, flexible commuting, in and out of the office, because we have three basic models: the outsource model, the embedded model, where we're working. So, for example, we have 100 people in Mountain View sitting opposite Google, not on the Googleplex because of security reasons, but across the freeway, and they're there to work as closely as possible as they can. So we call that the embedded model. And then we, of course, we have the in-house model. We've in-house Sprint. It's a Harvard Business School case study. We're now doing it for the parent companies T-Mobile. Bayer, our in-housing client in pharma, was voted the in-housing client of the year last year. So we have very, very different models, but working from home, flexible commuting, flexible hours, dispersed living was a meat and drink for us before. All that COVID has done, and it's done terrible things, but all that COVID has done is accelerated that process. So to some extent, I get a bit amused when people say, wasn't it wonderful that we managed to go to virtual working when COVID hit, when we were already set up that way. So actually, COVID for us has helped us accelerate, because we said pre-COVID, we're probably in about 50 cities around the world. And in some cities, we have multiple offices. We're going to consolidate those into one. So, for example, in Buenos Aires, we have about 450, 500 people. They're going into one building. We were in three. So in London, and what COVID did was we gave us the opportunity to get out of leases and to move out of leases. And then what we've done actually is sort of zero-based in a way, because we've had the opportunity of jettisoning our existing leases, going to zero base, and deciding what is the best structure. So we will be, if there is a modification in our pattern, which I think there will be when the vaccines have kicked in, let's say in Q2 of this year or late Q2 of this year, what you will see at S4 is people probably spending about 2 or 3 days in the office, having the option, 2 or 3 days. The configuration of the offices being different in terms of more meeting space and probably less office space, etc. More meeting space with clients, more meeting space with our own people, flexible commuting hours, distanced living. So I think it's going to be very, very, very different. I'm trying to remember the company that can't remember exactly who it was who talked about was welcoming distance living, and we encourage people to do it. It wasn't a digital company; it was a traditional company. So I think I think it was one of the banks actually sort of encouraging. I think yes, it was Moelis, Ken Moelis of Moelis, saying that their bankers, which is a sort of a boutique, mid-sized investment bank, successful bank, saying if their bankers wanted to work from upstate New York instead of the city, Manhattan or downtown Manhattan, then that was perfectly, Wall Street, that was perfectly okay. So I think you are going to see significant change, but at S4, because of our roots and because of our origins, we had changed, we were different anyway. That's what people don't quite get. By the way, coming back to your first question, I think it's the reason why, or one of the reasons why, we do so well, because we are so different to the traditional model.
And you're still getting the job done. I mean, you've grown.
We're getting the job done faster, better, cheaper is what we say. Faster is more agility, because some of the companies that you've mentioned don't have the agility and prize the agility, and agility gets the job done. Better means understanding 20 or so companies: Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, TikTok, depending on where the international operations go, Apple and Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, IBM, SAP, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, LG, Samsung, Epic, JD.com, Spotify, Netflix, Xiaomi. These companies are the sorts of companies that we have to understand, because what we're doing effectively is deciding where our clients should place their bets. They have a budget, And, if as a result of the terrible events in America around the Capitol building,
Right.
A week or so ago, the elements of the social media rise or fall, we go with it. What we do is analyze what's going on and advise our clients in probably an increasingly complex world what to do. That's what we try to do. That's essentially what we're doing. So we're really evaluating the strength of hardware companies, software companies, and the platforms. That's what we do. And we're not aligned with one rather than the other. We work even-handedly, agnostically with all of them. The trouble with the agencies is, they have a vested interest in their own model, which is a service model. And then they're not really in favor of the in-house model because they see it doing it themselves out of a job. We don't worry about that. We look at in-housing, if clients believe in-housing works and we agree, what we do is work with them to do that. And then there's two services afterwards, which are very important: advising the client on changes in technology and advising the client on people, because people generally don't like to work in one vertical or a narrow range of verticals. So there's often churn when you go in-house, and we can provide hands on keyboards, or we can provide advice on people, which can be very helpful. So, we have a different approach.
Well, I'm curious, we can contrast the new era disruptive model with the holding company model. But as far as your peers who are also pursuing the same path that you are, who among them do you consider to be your biggest competitors, and what separates you from them?
Accenture is clearly the one. I mean, we see the holding companies. We don't see them as one. We see bits of them. So it might be an RGA or a Huge or an AKQA or a VML or an Essence. So we're there, but there's sort of three levels of competition. There's sort of specialists like Jellyfish, which is now owned by a French conglomerate, Finmac, and Webedia, which is their subsidiary in digital. So they might compete with us on digital media. Then you might get Oliver on the content side, part of You and Mr. Jones. But their models, the Finmac model and You and Mr. Jones are different. You and Mr. Jones is sort of like an investment trust or an investment fund. Finmac is a private holding company. So that's a sort of the micro level. Then at the sort of second level, you have the holding companies, but bits of the holding companies. And the third level, I think, most importantly, you have the consultants, and within the consultants, it's really Accenture. I mean, we come across PWs and Deloittes occasionally, but the big strategic consultancies, not McKinsey, Bain, BCG, are not who we come up against. So if you take Mondelez, or you take as an example, we competed against Accenture. They got kicked out in the first round. Then WPP and Publicis. If you look at BMW Mini, again WPP got kicked out in the first round. Then we got to Aegis, Cognizant, Dentsu, Dentsu, Aegis, Cognizant, IPG, and Accenture. So I would say on client side, it's Accenture, and on deals, it's really very little competition from the holding companies. They've sort of gone to sleep, for whatever reason, because of strategic pressure on their business, lack of resources, whatever it happens to be. They may awaken again. But
that kind of makes it kind of brings up, if digital's growing so fast. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just finish off. I mean, Accenture on deal side, although they've gone a bit quiet recently. I think they've sort of shot their bolt a little bit. But the big competition on deals, on mergers, is private equity. That's where the huge competition. So I would say, in summary, it's Accenture on the client side and private equity on the deal side. Sorry, I stopped you. Yeah.
Oh no, I cut you off. So, well, I mean, if we see the pulling away from traditional advertising, we see more digital facing advertising. I mean, are the holding companies on a precipice here? I mean, is there going to be some big shakeup, some evolution that's going to happen industry-wide?
Well,
You mentioned that they're trying to hold on to their model. What's going to happen?
Well, you saw Publicis were reported to be to have been in negotiations with a big private equity company in in Europe. They denied that conversations were going on when the spokesperson was asked. I think it was last Friday, but it begged the question quite clearly as to whether discussions had gone on before, and if they had gone on before, which it sounds as though they had. It seems to me that what that was signalling was that the Bedinter family, which is the biggest shareholder, they own about 11% of the voting rights. In France, you have this system: if you hold the stock, I think for 2 years, you get 50% more voting rights. So it sounded as though the Bedinter family and Maurice Levy were throwing in the towel of being a public company. I don't know what that would have meant for Arthur Sadoun. It might have been curtains for Arthur Sadoun if that was to happen. So he's probably relieved that it didn't happen. But to your point of your question, that's a good example of one of the holding companies being under pressure. WPP is slightly bigger. It's less slightly bigger than it used to be, but it's slightly bigger. Omnicom is the biggest. Journalists and analysts forget that. Omnicom is the biggest by market cap. WPP used to be, but is now number 2. And, there's Dentsu as well, which had been rumored. Actually, even before COVID, it was rumored as a private equity. As private equity started to expand in Asia, I remember there was an article saying, what are the companies with market caps over $1 billion or whatever it was that will be vulnerable to private equity intervention. And Dentsu was in the article. Very difficult to do in Japan because of the sort of corporate etiquette or the corporate culture, which is a bit stultifying. But having said that, I think change is coming. I don't think, I think COVID buys, weak management a little bit of slack. They get a little bit of slack. The excuse is, COVID has disrupted our business. Give us a bit more time. But I think the answer to your question is that they will be faced with continuous pressure on the top line, and they're not positioned. They have the analog albatross round their neck. You take WPP. When I left WPP, we calculated that 40% of our business was digital. It still is the case according to their latest numbers. It's still 40%. So I don't know why it hasn't grown. I would have thought it would have grown a bit, but it's only 40%, which means you have 60%, which is analog and not growing. And they talk about simplification. They're probably going to have to complicate their organization in order to break out of the growth trap that they're in. So I think the answer to your question is continuous pressure and probably continuous decline. They're firing, or they will have fired about 50,000 people, according to Forrester, in 2020. Right. So, there are a lot of people, and as usual, it's the good people that, when they get upset, start to move. They're not necessarily the people who have been fired. As I said before, it tends to be the soldiers, not the generals. But it's the good people are on the march. I mean, we're seeing continuous flow of good people, and
they're coming into organizations like yours, the disruptive models.
There's continuous disruption. There's continuous disaffection. There's continuous gloom. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, if you're not growing, people look at their boots, they don't look at the sky.